welcome y'all to our Bible study here at the Church of Christ at Forest Hill. We're taking a look at Luke chapter 16. So let me,
Tie up your horse.
Okay.
Put your hand on your head.
Okay, so we're going to take a look at 16. And Joe, we'll have you read that. So if you would read the parable of the dishonest manager, as it's often called, 1 through 9.
Okay. Oh, Pam, I just caught verse 10. I'm sorry. We started off on the wrong foot tonight. We were both doubting Thomases. Jesus told his disciples, there was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So he called him in and asked him, what is this I hear about you? Give your account of your management, because you cannot be manager any longer. The manager said to himself, what shall I do now? My master is taking away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses. So he called in each one of his master's debtors, and he asked the first, how much do you owe my master? 800 gallons of olive oil, he replied. And the manager told him, take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 400. Then he said to the second, how much do you owe? 1,000 bushels of wheat, he replied. He told him, take your bill and make it 800. And the master condemned the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. I'm sorry. Let me back that up. We're not condemning tonight, we're commending. The master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourself, so that when it's gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings.
Okay, so yes, I know. So let's back up just a little bit. Let me tell you a little bit about the chapter. So the chapter 16 has a lot to do with money, and Jesus, as I said, Jesus is turning up the heat on the Pharisees. He did so, about Sabbath. He's talked about associations. Who do you associate with? Who's dirty and who's not. And this time he's going to talk about wealth because the Pharisees are lovers of money, as it says. I told you before when I was a peer tutor, when I was at Lubbock Christian University as an undergrad, I went through Luke and Matthew and the Gospels, and with mostly athletes that were doing poorly and had to be in tutoring to get their grades up. And I remember reading through the parable of the two brothers, the parable of the prodigal son, sometimes it's called, and then we read this one right after, and the girl was like, I really liked the other one, but this one is awfully weird. So it is weird. And one of the things that we have to kind of bear in mind is, how do parables work? So what is a parable, first of all?
It's an earthly story with a heavenly meaning, or something like that. That's what I've heard a long time ago.
Okay, yeah. I mean, that's not a bad answer. I mean, it's a story about things that are earthly, mundane, normal, everyday stuff that is then given a kind of turned to give a significance, different kind of significance. But they're not allegories, so it's not like if you've ever read the best known allegory for us would probably be like Animal Farm. Has anybody ever read that?
Yes.
Animal Farm. Okay, in Animal Farm, it's really about the Soviet Union, and all of the characters in all the animals in the book played the role of very specific people. So Napoleon is Stalin, and Snowball is Trotsky, and it's like that. That's how it works. But the parables are not like that. Jesus's parables are not like that. So sometimes, like in the parable of the Good Samaritan, there are characters, but they're kind of, you can play different roles in it. You can think of it in different ways. God can be the Good Samaritan sometimes. Jesus can be the Good Samaritan sometimes. I can be the man on the road other times. And hopefully one day I can be the Good Samaritan to someone else on the road, right? But the parable of the dishonest manager causes us problems because we tend to like to do allegory. We like to allegorize when it's a parable. So what we want to do, right, is to say, well, I'm supposed to be like this dishonest manager, this guy who's dishonest.
We want to put a character to each character in the
Yeah.
Want to be able to identify.
Yeah. Who's the dishonest manager? Is it God or me, or who's who, right? That causes us problems in other parables as well. Sometimes where you have, I'll come to other ones, but sometimes you have a master who returns and cuts people up and stuff like that. Okay. Kind of weird to think of God as a master in the ancient sense. He's just saying there's something that people do, and there's something similar that God, if this, then all the more with God. Okay, that's the kind of idea. He actually tells you the meaning of this one at the end, which is kind of nice. Hold on. Janine?
Hello.
Hi, can you hear us?
Yes, just fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
My camera is on strike again, so I'm sorry you
That's
won't.
fine.
Yeah.
Not a problem. Not, it's nice to see everyone, but it's okay.
Yeah.
I can hear you just fine.
Good. Okay, well, we're in Luke chapter 16.
Okay.
Thank
you.
So at the end of it, he just tells you, right? What's the point, right? What is the point? He says, basically be shrewd, but the point of it is to use dishonest wealth, so that when it is gone, they may welcome you into the eternal homes. Now then, the question is, what does that mean? Okay. What's the tricky phrase?
People use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourself, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings.
Yeah.
How is me dealing with these dishonest people going to get me into? I don't think that'll get me into anything having to do with eternity.
So it's not dishonest people.
It's the wealth.
Yeah.
That's dishonest.
So it's actually the most direct translation, the most literal translation, is unjust wealth.
Okay.
Someone
has it that doesn't deserve it.
Well, that's the question.
Okay.
Because there's a few. When I preached on this, I kind of went over this. He goes over it in different ways, and you could read it in different ways. You could say, well, it's sort of like. So here's an obvious misreading. Go off and loot and steal, and then use that money, give it to people to make friends with them.
I mean, Robin Hood.
Yeah, Robin Hood.
That doesn't sit right.
Yeah, but except that the story of Robin Hood only works if Robin Hood is correcting some injustice, right? But here you are actually like King John in that story. You're taking the money. Yeah. So there's no correcting, like it's just your ill-gotten gains. So you could be a cartel boss. a drug cartel boss or something. You know what I mean? That's an obvious misreading.
Mm.
So so that can't be what he means. He could also mean something, maybe he could. The other option, as far as I see it, is that he's talking about wealth in general. Like when you look at the world and you see the way that wealth lands, it's not just. Well, it is not. Right?
Well, the arrogance it brings too.
Sure, right, yeah.
You know, a former president that just thumbs his nose at anything he doesn't want to do, and does it flagrantly. Whereas Nixon snuck around and did it.
But there's a lot of what we would say would be like this, you know, to speak more generally. There's you could look at people who work really, really hard. They're really, really, you know, they work really hard and they're poor, dirt poor at the end of the day. They're honest and they work hard and they're dirt poor at the end of the day. There are other people that just by virtue of the family they were born into are billionaires. And that's true. I think the Estee Lauder heiress in France, she's like one of the top, I don't know, 20 richest people in the world. She's never worked. You know, so you could say like the way that
She
wealth.
smells great.
I'm sure she does. Yeah, yeah. But the way that, and she actually, there was a big to do about her in particular in France because she was evading taxes, which is like why,
Why?
Yeah.
right? But you know, like, yeah, it's just sort of like, okay, you're gonna. The world is what it is under the reign of sin. Any wealth that's running around has touched injustice at some point, right? Even if you didn't do it, it moves around. Like wealth doesn't stay in one spot, but it moves around. And when it comes into your hands, use it to build friendship.
How about use it to help those in need?
So I think
Not
that I think
friends.
that's what he means. That's kind of where I'm going. So in this particular case, Jesus, how does the dishonest manager actually do this?
He tells the people to adjust their own debt.
He
Yeah.
steals from his master.
Yeah, they actually possibly the most interpreters of the parable now think he takes it out of his own commission.
Oh.
Yeah.
But it doesn't say that.
It doesn't say that, but
Yeah.
the margins, the way the numbers work out, if he was going to steal it, he would just go whole hog, right? He would just forgive the whole thing. But since it's a limited number, it's not the whole amount of debt, then they think he's taking it out of his commission.
And he's called good because he's getting any refund on the debt as opposed to none.
So what's shrewd about it is he forgives debt and basically puts himself in a position where, because he's given that gift, they are going to welcome him into their homes.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, they owe him.
I think he's a great guy.
Yeah, they. You could think of it in terms of they owe him a debt, or you could just think of it in terms of he's given them a gift and they want to give one in return. So that they don't have a ledger, right, where they're saying you're going to stay with us this many days because you. But they would say we're friends now, right? So let's do what friends do, which means you took care of me when I was in need, and I'll take care of you when you're in need, right? So there's a reciprocity, but it's not the reciprocity of a ledger,
Yeah.
right? So it doesn't have to come out to zero at the end of the day. He's basically, I mean, the teaching is basically the attitude about money. So don't see money as your just deserts. Mammon is unjust, probably is what he means, just is. instead of seeing it as a reward for what you deserve, look at it as an opportunity to make connections with people and to build relationships and to help people who are in need and put yourself in a position to be helped later on. And so just a very different way of looking at money than was common for them or for us. But it's fundamentally, it's a matter of, yeah, it's about what's good for a community, on not just what's good for me.
First,
No more questions about this strange passage?
No, it just doesn't make sense.
Can
I
you?
can't quite grasp what Jesus is trying to get across.
What's the?
Because the whole thing is predicated on a failing. The manager failed to manage the possessions of the owner,
Yeah.
and there's nothing said about except that he's going to lose his job. And I don't see then why the other thing follows that.
Yeah, and he's not very sympathetic either. He's
No.
like, I don't want to work hard, and I'm proud, and I don't
can't
like
dig,
to
I
work
wanna
hard.
beg.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think it's there's an element of irony in the story and even of humor, because the guy was not shrewd when he was working for his master. He is shrewd, however, in building friendships, using money to build friendships. So he's not a good businessman, but he's good at making relationships with people. And Jesus is that's his point. It's like,
Well,
what kind of?
the only way that I can see that is that the master would commend him for this
Yeah.
is if, as you said, he wasn't giving away the master's money; he was giving away his cut of the profit.
Yeah, that's the other reason why people think that. Yeah, the master would.
So he wasn't taking anything from the master. He was making friends. He was.
Unless the master thought he was never going to get any repayment anyway. And so to get 80% of it is much better than getting 0%.
Yeah, that could be. I mean, most of them do think it's out of the commission.
But it is fairly shrewd to say, you owe my master 1,000 bushels. I'm going to get 200 of that. So just
Take off 200.
give him 800.
Yeah.
And I'll throw in my commission. That's a shrewd. If the goal is to garner the support of the debtor,
Yeah.
then that is a shrewd move.
Yeah, I mean, what's the exchange here? The exchange is he's exchanging money for friendship.
Mm-hmm.
That's the exchange. That's the point. That's the point that Jesus is making. Like, don't trade the other way, like people so often do, where they trade their friendships away for money.
Mm-hmm.
Trade money away for friendships. I mean, that's Jesus is. It's not a. I think I said this when I preached the sermon, but if you look up this passage or the other passages, you'll find people that there's this whole like cottage industry of people that they look at Jesus as a great businessman and he has wonderful business advice, and they sort of just like warp the story beyond all recognition to say this is all good business advice and you should be like this. You should be a dishonest business person like this. I don't think Jesus actually does have good business advice. Like, I don't. But that is sort of the point. He's just saying, we're not in this whole faith thing for to come out ahead financially. We're here to come out ahead in terms of the relationships we build with each other and with God. And that's there's a kind of eternal, if you want to put it in economic terms, your dividends come in way down the line with interest, but it's
camera
way down the line.
Yeah,
that,
we're
so we
told
just
to,
get this picture of him that's
Okay,
static,
houses,
you know, we don't get to
pictures
see him
all
actually in motion.
you know, don't say
So you
worry
can hear
about
people, but you
saving
can't
things
see
down
them.
here or having possession down
Go
here
up here,
where
there's some
thieves and
earth.
robbers can
Yeah.
and that, but you're saving your whatever is. I
It's-
can't even say it.
It's the same principle. It's the same principle. He's just he's talking about it from a different angle.
Okay. all right.
Yeah. Yeah, the parable of the rich man who tore down his barns to build bigger
Mhm.
ones.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, that is the point. It's just like don't store up treasures where moth and rust can.
Right.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And it's the same thing. So does that make more sense? I mean, with
That
the
makes more sense.
that you exchange, but here it's particularly to value human relationships
Mhm.
and to help those in need, build friendships with them.
Mhm.
It's the sort of economic side to the kind of social side that he's been talking about. Right? Hang out with prostitutes and sinners. You know, those are the associations that you ought to be making. Instead of trying to come out ahead socially,
Sure.
with prestige and power, don't. Just go in with people that you can help and that you can build friendships with, and those are the kinds of relationships you want to value. This is just that's like the economic and financial side of it. Okay, does that make more sense, Pam?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions, thoughts, concerns about? I want to, if there are, it's one of the, it's probably everybody's least favorite parable.
Yeah.
Well,
know.
it is unless unless you are unless you discover, as I just did because you said it, that what he's giving up is not the master's money. That would be shrewd, but in a very dishonest sense.
Yeah, well, it's theft.
But it makes more sense if he's given up his own, because the master then would see that as being shrewd. You're giving up your money in order to make friends with these people. You're going to need them after you're not working for me anymore.
Yeah.
And so that it makes sense.
The one more thing I will say. The other thing to say when he talks about adakias mammon, right? Unjust mammon. You have to remember, like, who has, most people are really, really poor.
Yeah.
Like $1 a day. 90% of
Yeah.
everybody's living or more.
Yeah, so 800 gallons of.
Yeah. So
that's a lot of.
yeah. So the only people that have money are people that they're basically absentee landlords running sharecroppers.
Mhm.
So that's the only like people stocking up wealth do have it unjustly. Like there are no people that have lots of money without any guilt in those days. Like it's all just basically either slavery or something akin to debts. It's debt peonage, which is basically just another form of slavery. So there is no like just wealth. It's all pretty unjust.
I think Jesus is teaching again, that what's important down here is not, what is important is not money and possessions, but relationships and devotion to God. That's
Yeah.
what's important, not money.
Yeah. So I mean, if you're poor and you're hearing this, most of his audience would be. He's saying, don't try to do that.
Yeah.
Right. And if you're rich, he's saying, you have some things you can do with this, which is a lot better than what you're doing with it, right? So that's you have to think about it. His message lands differently depending on who you are. But as we're about to find out in the next little passage.
And the same was true in the last chapter. The kid that wanted cash now and the kid that
Yeah,
wouldn't
that's
even
true.
go into the party.
That's true. Yeah.
And it was all jealousy and hatred, and stuff came out that the poor father never heard from this kid's mouth before.
Yeah.
Why are you acting like this? Your brother was dead. Yeah, I wish he'd stay that way. Whoa,
Yeah.
That's pretty rough.
I mean, you're trying to think of some issue in life doesn't result out of some financial considerations. There aren't very many. Right? Pretty much every war, every disagreement,
On a big scale, yeah.
and well, even on a smaller scale, disagreements between people many times, are over some aspect
Yeah.
of money or who's in charge.
Or like this thing in the guy in Russia that's
Putin.
putting these people out of their country, Ukraine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, to me, I don't understand. Why are you chasing these people out of their home? Okay, there's a lot of land there. Do you want their land?
Money-
Do you
money's
want to
involved
just take
somewhere.
over?
Well, Ukraine is pretty much the breadbasket of Asia.
He wants it.
Oh,
It
so
is-
that,
it-
and
it-
that
it- yeah,
basically
it
is
is.
it then. Okay,
Oh, yeah,
that's
it
what
is.
I had figured out for myself.
It-
'Cause I,
Yeah, it is, but it's a weird one because it's not as obviously financial as a lot of conflicts are.
but bottom line, it's going to be financial, right? It's got
I-
something to do with
I-
money.
I actually think that one has more to do with his very particular way of thinking about Russian nationhood. That he thinks that Ukraine is just part of Russia and never, and he's just always thought like that. And he just gradually stopped having people around him who would ever disagree with him. But this
But
is
even if it's part of Russia, what? Oh, this part over here is ours, and so you can't stay here. You have to leave.
yeah.
Is that basically it?
It's
Well, he's not kicking them out. He's wanting to take them over.
yeah.
Well, many of them were leaving, so obviously they
Well-
didn't want to be taken over.
Well, they didn't want to be taken. Oh, obviously, yeah.
I-
It's an enormously wealthy, at least potentially. It's like, getting Kansas, Nebraska, Colorado, Iowa, Minnesota, North and South Dakota all together. I mean, that's where you could feed the world. And Ukraine has traditionally been
Yeah. It does
very
have
much like that.
It does. Yeah. It's an unusual conflict in that it does seem like the primary motivator for him has been a very idiosyncratic ideology. It's not even like very widely shared in Russia. It's just like his kind of worldview. And there may be other considerations, but like the really rich people in Russia are like not happy about it. They did not want it. Has been really bad for their economy. So it's an unusual one in that sense because you would think they would, if it was financial, they'd be happy about it.
Yeah.
So they're always like, sometimes, I don't want to go too far afield, but this is something that people that love capitalism and also people that love communism both get wrong, which is that there are things that motivate people beyond material things, like money, land, whatever. And things that have to do with like matters of the spirit. Right? And they do. You could give people money and they're still not happy. And you have wealthy countries where they have things that their material needs are met and they still go to war and do all kinds of crazy stuff. Because some other need of the spirit is not met. Okay, well we're kind of far afield
All right.
now.
Yeah, I'm sorry. We can go
Okay.
back to this.
So let's get through the next 4 verses. Jesus is going to continue to antagonize the Pharisees. Kip, would you read 10 through 13?
Okay. 10 through 13. Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. And whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So if you have not have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? And if you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? No, no servant can serve two masters. He will either hate one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money.
Yeah. Okay. So this is like we've run into this kind of way of talking before. It's not a run through argument. It's he's saying sort of rapid fire aphorisms, little short sayings. Okay. And because if you read it as a straight through argument, it's sort of like doesn't make a lot of sense. Right. Yeah, it makes more sense than the most confusing of all of Jesus's parables, for sure. Yeah. Okay, but he's laying. I mean, it's a financial thing, but it's also not. I mean, it's just you get when you have little responsibility, you show yourself to be capable of greater responsibility, which is. I mean, the wrong way to that seems kind of obvious to me what he means by that. The wrong way to read that is that if somebody is sitting on a big pile of wealth or has a lot of power in their hands, then that means that they deserve it or something, that God gave it to them because they were responsible with a little bit. And if that were so, human history would have run a lot differently, right? So that's a sort of obvious misreading, but I think it's partly it's actually kind of so they're already at this point starting to dole out alms. This is kind of in the background. You get a little sense of this later on when who's got the purse. It's Judas.
Judas, yeah.
Yeah, so it's all in the background, but they have some little institutional stuff where it seems like they're giving out money to the poor, raising money perhaps, though that's not entirely clear. It sort of is just kind of assumed that everybody knows what's going on with that. And this is a major thing in the church once the church comes around, is thinking about, who do we get to handle the purse? And, well, you pick somebody who's been responsible with little things. So be happy to take on little things, and then you can take on big things.
Is this similar to, but not exactly, the talents?
Yeah,
Okay.
there's a similar thing there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's, but the...
At that point, he says something about being, you're being given little, if you take care of, almost like if you take care of this little bit, you'll be given more.
To those to whom much has been given, more will be given.
Right. Okay.
There's, yeah, I mean, it's kind of, if you're thinking about this in the context of the early church, who's this for? It's for deacons. Deacons are the ones that are in the early church. They're the ones going around and doling out the funds. Yeah. If you read this stuff about deacons in the pastoral epistles, it's all about that. You have to have somebody that you can give money and not steal it, basically. So it's kind of about that. I mean, it's not. These are not like here's some Jesus business practices. It's just like when you're doing this kind of job in the church, don't hope for a promotion. Just do your little stuff, and then you'll get more responsibility. So then, and I'll point out too, he uses the dishonest wealth thing again, in verse 11, which it seems like it's just kind of his way of talking about money. Instead of specifying, be like, these are the rules for, when you make money as a drug lord, but whenever you're making money in honest ways, none of this stuff applies, right? Seems like it's just what you do with money. So okay. So he goes on to the end. No slave can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. Not that hard to understand. Hard to do.
What was interesting, the reaction.
Yeah, they're about to
He
freak
has
out.
to-
Yeah.
It says they sneered at him.
Yeah.
The version says.
Well, what
They sneered at him.
what is he? What's he accusing them of? What's the
Loving money more than
Loving money.
anything else.
More than God.
which is what's the technical term for that?
Greed.
Stupid.
Idolatry.
Yeah.
Yeah. The you don't have to put the gold into the shape of a calf for it to be an idol, right?
Right.
Exactly.
No.
I could take the shape of coins and it comes out the same thing. That's what he's accusing them of. I mean, and for that context, for the Jewish audience, that's really obvious.
Well, he says it directly. You cannot serve God and money.
Yeah.
You want to serve one or the other, then you can't serve both.
Yeah. So yes, it's pretty
Which is interesting because the source of all money is God.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Money is a. I would agree in a qualified sense. The source of anything that we would properly call wealth is God, right? Though money is something we came up with to sort of track it, how it moves around, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, if you have it, if you're fortunate enough to have it, and especially have more than you need, that's a blessing, and that comes from God. But you have to realize that. The right thing to do is realize that and do the best you can with it. But most people aren't wanting to.
It's interesting too. He uses the word money very specifically, so it's not. He doesn't say wealth, which I think in their context they would just use goods. They would say something like that, which is actually just what wealth in English. That's what it means. Just comes from. It's like the same word as well-being, wheel, commonweal, commonwealth, yeah.
And that last line though, of verse 15.
We're all
basically says
getting
that.
so ahead of
I'm
where we
sorry.
are.
We're not there yet.
Okay, we're not there
We're not there
I
yet,
won't-
portion.
I'll talk about verse 15.
I'll just read it real quick and
No,
get it
no,
out of the
you
way.
don't have to.
But
Just, sorry,
we didn't read it because there's a
you weren't there yet.
yeah, it's kind of running. There's a running little thing that he does, but I wanted to make a point about he says specifically money, and so it's not the problem is not that people it's not that there's like all these it's not wealth in the sense that there are good things in the world because God made those good things, right?
Mm-hmm.
But whenever we use money to track it, we look at it all. We look at the good things that God made, and also the corrupt things that we do with it, and we look at them under one aspect, as one thing, when they're not.
No.
Right? There's a lot of. If you think about you look at somebody's property after somebody has died, and you look at what they've got. All of that has a monetary value, but not all of it's actually wealth.
Right.
A lot of it is junk. I mean, some of it's just immoral, but some of it's just trash, which is why it's such a pain to clean out somebody's house after they've died.
Yeah.
For most people, unless the person is a monk and did you a huge favor and.
That's why I feel sorry for my children. I truly do.
But we in particular in our society we have the ability to produce a lot, but a lot of what we produce is trash.
Yeah.
It's not. It was never worth making, and that's the problem with money is that it obscures your ability to see what's actually good and worth doing and worth making.
In a consumable culture.
By design, yeah. So it doesn't actually matter what you consume. It's just anything. You can consume anything, and it's all good for the
We
economy.
have so many things that can be used once.
Yeah, which is
and
crazy.
discarded.
That's crazy.
It's
Yeah.
crazy to do that. It's nuts. And you could imagine what Jesus would say about that. But that's, in our society, it's almost easier to see his point about, money is this it's this sort of veil behind which wealth and there's a great word that an English writer came up with in the 19th century, but he distinguished between wealth and ilth.
Oh,
And
wealth and
Ilth is the stuff that people buy with money and it's garbage.
Mhm.
Should never be made. It's terrible junk, right? Wealth is actually the good stuff that God made, right? Wealth is soil and good. It's good stuff, right? And Ilth is single-use plastic and a lot of music that comes out and. It's Ilth. It's not actually good, right? It's just, and money sort of, it just kind of puts a veil over it, calls it all by the same thing, and so when you serve that, you're pursuing some good things, probably mostly bad things, and then you have a sense of power or status because of that, which is bizarre, right? And it's weird that people can say that and recognize it and then still do it. It's like that's like the essence of sin is that you it's a bad idea.
But you're doing it anyway.
You do it anyway. You probably have somewhere in your house that life's not about money and and yet there it is, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so Jesus is about to get in trouble.
Again.
We'll just read. We'll kind of finish up with these next two verses, and Pam, if you would read those for us.
Starting in
Verse 14.
14 to where?
Just 14 and 15.
Okay. The Pharisees who loved money heard all this and were sneering at Jesus. He said to them, "You are the ones who justify yourselves in the eyes of men, but God knows your hearts. What is highly valued among men is detestable in God's sight." Ooh, that was a slap in the face.
Yes, it
So you
was.
think they got the point?
Yeah, it's pretty. And like I said, Jesus' teachings about money they're very uncompromising.
This whole book, he hasn't minced many words.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, there are very few people that can read it without feeling challenged. That's what I mean. And if you read it and you're not challenged, you're not reading it.
Yeah.
The word that Luke uses for lovers of money is actually it's a single word, but it's really like lovers of silver. So those silver lovers, but it's their response is to laugh at him. So I actually misspoke. He's not in trouble. He's being ridiculed. They think he's ridiculous.
But he doesn't care.
Yeah, I think that would be true in every society. You could go to you think about going to K Street in D.C. where all the lobbyists are, or you go to Wall Street or something and say this, and people would not bother with arguing with you. They would just laugh at you, because they would say, "Well, you're sort of an idealist or something. You don't really live in the real world." And Jesus saying, "Well, the real world is one that's fundamentally and first of all related to God. So you're not living in the real world, right? If you're not recognizing that fact. That's the fundamental fact that makes our world that is what our world is. That only exists because of that relationship. You're living as though it's not real." And his response to their ridicule is interesting, because he talks about justification, and what does he mean by that? Why does he talk about that?
Is that justifying yourself or trying to make yourself look good in the eyes of men?
So
Is
it
there
could
a lot
be
of difference
it could
between
be read different in different ways. I mean, because there's this sort of literal meaning of the words, and then there's a sort of connotative meaning. I mean, so he could mean because he's talking about wealth, right?
that? Yeah.
They love money, they have money, and they're trying to
Mhm.
say we have money and also we're
Yeah,
good people,
We're the big shots. We
right?
got money.
We're absentee landlords and we have debt peonage, and but we're good people, like we're really good people. So they're making themselves out to be righteous in the eyes of others, right? It's a kind of a process.
Well, it's the guy who is the sharecrop master who gives tithes on the street corner.
Yeah, that's pretty much right. That's right.
Who gives what?
These are the guys who, you know, take money and swindle and defraud other people, but stand on the street corner and pray out loud.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
it's
yeah.
They
performative.
justify themselves
Yes.
to the
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's sort of a performative altruism,
Mhm.
sort of say, look how good of a person I am.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they're. It seems like they have a kind of prosperity gospel that's going on, which say if you have it, then God gave it to you and you deserve it, and it's a sign of God's blessing.
Mm.
And they're saying, yes, it's okay that we have all this money because God is blessing our lifestyle, right?
Mhm.
And it's I mean, that's basically you could look at this cross culture, but basically every culture ends up with a kind of prosperity theology where you end up saying those who have what they have because God or the gods as established this as such, right? Jesus is saying no,
No.
right?
Yeah.
I would know as God,
Mhm.
and then he drives it further and he says, you know, what you justify yourselves in the sight of others, but God knows your heart, for what is prized by human beings is an abomination in the sight of God. And he seems to mean, I mean, he seems to be talking about money, right?
Yeah.
You're all after money. God hates it, right? It's not into it. God is not. It's not a blessing. If it's a responsibility at best,
Mhm.
and only and in that sense can be a good thing, but it's probably going to turn into a temptation unless you get rid of it, right? So yeah, like I said, it's very hard to live up to what Jesus has to say about money. There are lots of, we'll talk about this again, but there are lots of groups that have tried to live it out in a very in a very sincere way, and it's very hard. Even if you're in the Franciscans, for example, that's one of their big things when they started out. It was like, we're actually going to take Jesus seriously, what he says about this, because nobody else seems to. Everybody kind of reads over it. Nobody really cares, but it's there, right? So what do we do? And even they, within a couple of generations, they had started to try to work around it. And then within 300 years, they owned slave plantations in South America and stuff. So yeah, I mean, even if you're in a sort of institution that's committed to reading these and taking them very seriously, you could still slip off, right? It's that big of a temptation. And maybe that explains why Jesus is so. He's fierce about it. I mean, it's really very intense, and nobody comes out of the room alive on it. I mean, it really is very, very challenging, and yeah. Okay, well, we'll keep talking about it because Jesus keeps talking about it.
Yeah,
It just keeps going. And soon after they're going to crucify him. So you can maybe see why.
well, he doesn't seem to avoid poking him in the eye.
Yeah,
He-
yeah.
I think he's bringing on the inevitable.
Well, he's got a job to do and time's closing down on him.
Absolutely.
But he's before we finish, he is like systematically poking at some of the most sensitive issues
Yes.
of who's dirty and who's clean. What do we do with money, right? How do we regard people at the top of the pyramid, and how do we regard people at the bottom? And everything that Jesus says is the opposite of what people would want him to say,
Right.
Mhm.
Not really what culture says.
and even like what we would want him to say. It's, if you really think, what are the analogs of this in our own culture? It's really hard for everybody. Even even if you're somebody on the outs, and you go to church, this strange community of people that are from all different parts of humanity are supposed to. Now you have to associate with people that may have harmed you in the past, right? You're on the outs, or if you're on the ends, right? You have to change what you're doing.
Mhm.
You can't keep doing what you did before and hurting people, right? It's hard for everybody. Okay,
He didn't say it would be easy.
yeah, that's why we need grace, right?
Right.
Okay, let's wrap up and let's pray. Lord, thank you for this day that you've given to us. Thank you for the Gospel of Luke. Thank you for the teachings of Jesus. Lord, we see our own insufficiency. We see our own desire to be self-sufficient, which we cannot be. Help us to see the world, first of all, as a gift given to you, and not as something that we can take and give to ourselves. Help us to live with trust in you and one another, to be generous, to use money when it passes through our hands to build up friendships with other people, instead of pursuing money at the expense of friendships. Help us to serve you and not money. Help to alleviate the desire for influence or power, or just fear that we might have that leads us to worship money. Free us from that idolatry. Watch over those who are sick, those who are mourning. Be with Velma, help her to improve. Ella, help her to improve. Be with Velma as well, of course.
Yes.
Be with Shirley Moore's family, and watch over them, and the Stewarts as well, as they continue to process their loss. We pray these things in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Okay. Are y'all having a good week, Smiths?